Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Business Edge channel. My name is Phil Mattia. I'm the marketing director for the Feliciano School of Business. I'm here with our associate professor in the Department of Marketing, Dr. Manveer Mann. We're talking about the topic related to COVID. So before we begin, welcome, Dr. Mann. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for having me.
So today we're talking about a topic that we are all now being affected by in some capacity. Today is February the 2nd. For those who are listening, just to timestamp our discussion, we are talking about COVID. And for those of you who've looked at or listened to other episodes, we've done several episodes related to COVID, how it's impacted our daily lives, everywhere from the stock market to stimulus plans to the economy to accounting. And today we're talking about retail, which affects all of us because we all shop one way or the other, whether it's in stores or online. And how has COVID impacted the retail space? So this topic interested me because I read an article a couple of days ago, or actually a few days ago, on CNBC and talking about how Americans won't be rushing to retail stores to shop after COVID vaccine based on a survey that was done by First Insight. And like myself, as I've not gone to retail stores since COVID started and have been shopping more online and more with delivery and really limited my exposure. So the topic is, will shoppers return to stores in post-COVID America? And Dr. Mann is going to share with us her thoughts and insights on that topic. So let us begin. So how has COVID impacted retail stores and retail shopping?
As you pointed out, Phil, based on that CNBC article, obviously COVID has had a huge impact on retail sales. Last year, just in the months of February and April, there was a 20% drop in retail sales. And particularly some segments of retail have been very badly impacted by it. For example, clothing and accessories saw almost 90% decline, and department stores saw a 45% decline. So some analysts, there's one Deloitte report out there that says that this is a retail recession. COVID has sort of led to a retail recession where it's just sudden shutdown of consumer activities. So this has really had a very negative impact on a lot of retailers. We've seen bankruptcies happen, and has led to some sort of structural changes as well. For example, in the past, Nordstrom's was known for providing really excellent customer service, and their in-store customer service was something that was sort of shared in case studies in classrooms. Well, now direct interaction is not what customers want as a form of customer service. It's replaced by other sort of more standardized ways of providing customer service, like, contactless touch points, like you mentioned in your experience, deliveries and all of that. And other things like convenience obviously has become very, very important, which you also pointed out, to buy online, pick up in store. There's been a huge increase in retailers providing curbside pickup. They've even now, when you go shopping, you can see more parking spaces allocated to curbside pickup as well, and delivery, obviously. The other thing that has become interesting also is, because we've been shopping online a lot, returns have become sort of critical. This return processing and the way pandemic has impacted that has become pretty interesting as well. There's new safety standards that you need to meet, and so there's a whole range of changes in the back end that have happened on that aspect. And I believe that we were on another Feliciano Live one time where we were talking about these stores being converted into sort of mini fulfillment centers. So that's another thing we are seeing, pickup points where the stores are nothing but really fulfillment centers. So sort of a different use of that physical footprint that retailers had. And I think Nordstrom was another one that just announced a while ago that they were closing a lot of their stores that are not performing well, and had also converted some of its stores where you can't buy anything. It was just all purely service oriented, where you could, pick up stuff and but really you're not really purchasing anything within that store.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What's interesting about retail is they are adjusting to the whole online shopping movement that's been happening for years. I think you and I talked about this in one of our previous discussions on Feliciano Live.
Right,
How retail was adjusting to the movement to online and the big box stores that went away because they never adjusted or evolved.
right,
Here comes
right.
COVID and here comes a recession impacting retail again. So it's another 1-2 punch hitting them. Your comment regarding clothing being down, it's interesting because it affects everyone because
Hmm.
why do you need to go out and buy work outfits when you're working remotely?
Right,
And it
right.
goes down to so many, not only the big stores like the Targets and the Walmarts and the Nordstroms and the Macy's, but the little stores as well that are just barely getting by, the small business owners that are selling
Hmm.
clothes or shoes, and it's impacted everyone. I think the comment was it that you have to have a Zoom top or a Zoom shirt.
Yeah,
What matters.
that is true. That is true. Yeah, and the loungewear has made a big comeback now, which you may notice if you're out and about sometimes, like people that you would normally see in, some form of pants are now in some form of pajamas, right? So yeah, it has really changed, and I believe that'll have an impact on the fashion trends, and therefore what sort of, clothes we see online or in stores in the future. They're definitely going to be more comfort oriented. Yeah, so a lot of shifts all over the place with the pandemic.
And you mentioned this on how has retail adjusted to make shoppers feel safe during the COVID, which we're still in now during this stage. What are some of the things they've done in the stores to make shoppers feel safe?
So obviously, implementing visible safety and hygiene measures are very important. And these measures are not just for customers, but also for the staff so that the staff feels comfortable. So there has to be social distancing, sanitization procedures, and also a lot of stores are putting that information out there for the customer to see and feel safe. And they're limiting the number of people that are in the store, which is something you might have noticed as you go to grocery or any other store. There's somebody who's counting how many people are in. And I found something really interesting this morning as I was thinking about this podcast. There was an Accenture survey out, which said, according to that survey, the general fears about health are gradually coming down. Consumers are definitely still uncomfortable with public spaces, but they seem to be a little bit more comfortable with sort of familiar places like grocery stores now than they were before in pharmacy stores, which is good news for brick and mortar stores that, there is some level of comfort returning with being in that physical space, not just any public space, but really, these essential places that we go to shop.
Yeah, it's interesting because when March, during when here in the U.S., when COVID was really becoming in the news and people were starting to really realize all the restrictions, I remember shopping early on in probably the second, third week of March, and going to my supermarket and wearing gloves. And at
Hmm.
that point, they were saying you need to wear gloves.
Right,
You didn't have to wear a mask. And I remember
right.
going in and, you didn't have the arrows and they were limiting the number of people, but every day that went by, there were different type of restrictions as
Right,
I was adjusting to this new world of COVID, because
right.
they were, as we all were, they were learning as the days were going on because we didn't have the information being that it was so new and they had to
Absolutely.
adjust as things were happening. But I just remember that feeling of, I think I
Hmm.
went to the Target in my town and some people had masks. And I remember that was probably the first time I saw people wearing masks
Hmm.
in the US. And it was jarring and seeing that.
Right,
And I
right.
didn't have one on because it wasn't required and I didn't really
Right.
know. And
You,
basically just running out of the store because
you,
I was so
You
afraid.
know, that is so interesting because March is spring break, and we had planned to travel to Dubai and India in March, which we did. That was before COVID became so big in US. And so we went to Dubai, nobody's wearing masks or anything. And we went to India and we kind of got stuck there because international travel was limited. But finally, we got into a special flight in May. And in that flight, which is about 15 hours, there were people who were wearing, strange types of PPE that we haven't seen, like, improvised PPE. They're wearing masks and sort of face shields. And then the air hostesses were all in fully PPE. There was no meal service for this long flight. And it was just really interesting how things kind of evolve with how we are finding out what we know about how the virus spreads and all of those things. So, and same's true for us grocery shopping, right? So
Yeah.
it's shifting.
I mean, luckily we had, if this happened 15 years ago when you didn't really have we had the internet back then, but now with the internet, it made things so much easier. I know with grocery shopping, we got to a point we were just using Instacart to deliver our
Right,
groceries
right,
because we were
right.
afraid to go into the stores and still are, and it's very convenient. And
Yeah,
I guess as consumer behavior, it just teaches you all these other options you have instead of even in the post-COVID world.
yes,
Well, instead of me running out to the supermarket because the most precious thing we have in life is our time, this will save
right.
me an hour of time. I'm willing to spend the extra whatever $12 it
Abs
costs. It's easier.
Absolutely. Yeah, as you'd asked about how people would feel about going back to physical stores, even after pandemic, let's say it's all safe and we are in this post-pandemic world where nobody needs to wear masks or worry about catching COVID-19. But I think even in that time, the consumer behavior sort of shifted permanently. People are, so much more used to the convenience of shopping online, and it's just become so much more accessible. And retailers have really adapted well with their supply chains and sort of, restructuring the back end of the processes that there is no reason to go into a physical store when you can find, buy the same thing at almost the same price and it'll arrive at your door. And I think what's really interesting that caught my eye was um, so obviously digital, e-commerce has gone up, but for consumers who had never shopped online or just barely shopped online, the increase was projected to be 160%. So that's a huge boost, from people who had never shopped online or rarely did. And that's going to continue post-pandemic.
Yeah, when you think of, I know you and I have small children or small kids, how our kids' generation, when they get older, what's
Right.
retail going to look like in, 15, 20 years when, kids, and you probably have something similar, you probably have something similar uh, with your child. It's they know how to order through Alexa. They know how to go
Mm-hmm.
on, they know how to go on on the internet
Mm-hmm.
and order things. It's so much easier. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what you think they will ever shop in a store? And probably not. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you a funny story. Last week, my son grabbed my iPad and he went out to Target because I have a Target app,
Mm-hmm.
and I watched him navigate the app. And
Mm-hmm.
my kid's not a genius. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
he's smart, but he went on the app and he was, he found his Nintendo Switch and he was able to find the
Right.
game. He was able to find the accessory. And you realize when you look at it, he doesn't know how to read yet because he's only 5 years old.
Right.
But he just looks at the colors and the shapes and the photos. And he
And he
got to the
knows.
checkout page, literally got to
Yeah.
the checkout,
Yeah.
and unfortunately my information stored, and the credit
Oh
card
no.
the credit card photo. He's like, Daddy, what's your credit card number? Because he saw the photo of a credit card, so he knew how to put the credit
Yeah.
card number in. And you realize the way these
Yeah.
online sites are set up, even children can order things
Yeah.
because they just look at
Absolutely.
the colors and the buttons and the squares and the
Yeah.
photos, and they do it. So,
Mm-hmm.
that we could probably have a long conversation about retail 20 years from now because it's definitely going to look
Right.
a lot different than it
Right.
is. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I see that the same thing, with my little one, and she's done remote school since March, so she's probably more savvy with Zoom shortcuts than I am. So, so yeah, that's for sure. But I saw two really interesting things, like as we are talking about how online shopping has increased and how are we going to go into physical stores. So the first thing that I was reading a research article for a journal earlier, and it was about live streaming. Live stream shopping has gained so much momentum. It was $60 billion in 2019. Is almost double. It's like $120 billion. And it's huge in China. US is still sort of, I think it's said that we are maybe at $1 billion. But all these apps where there's live stream shopping, like Talk Shop Live and so on, they already have a huge following, and the pandemic really accelerated things for them. And also big companies like Amazon's investing in it, Facebook, Instagram. So there's on one end, we see all this new ways of socializing and shopping online that obviously as young people are sort of, leading that charge. And on the other hand, there was this another piece out from Deloitte about what's going to happen to the malls. And so there was this really interesting report about, well, malls are probably not going to be called malls anymore in the next maybe 5-10 years, where malls are going to become places where you go to try interesting, exciting new foods. Maybe there's offices there, maybe there's some residential areas, so it's kind of live, work, and play. So they're going to sort of really get sort of revamped. And why not? Because one of the real estate companies projected that this year about 5.7% of retailers are not able to pay their rent. And they projected that this is not going to be back to pre-pandemic, not for the next 4 or 5 years. So there's sort of these huge changes that are happening. And I think it's not just pandemic. Even with malls, we had been seeing this declining trend way before pandemic started. And now it's just gonna, so it's this interesting, online world where we are sort of, live stream shopping, and then the malls become a very different creature in itself. So
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 what exactly is live stream? If you can describe it for our listeners, what is live?
So live stream shopping is, so let's say, I'm an influencer or a celebrity, and it's kind of digitized version of QVC. So
Oh,
it's like more 21st century QVC. And so there's some influencers that have done really well. The most popular is Via. She's this girl in China who has, I think, one of the highest amount of following, and she sells anything from food. She'll be eating food and talking about it, or you can cars, you can, live stream shopping, sells makeup, booze, almost everything. And so it's like this really digitized, very millennial version of QVC.
oh, okay. The one of the other thing I read in this article, which really is everything's predicated upon, is the vaccinations.
Right,
So,
right.
this study showed that this first insight study that 1/3 of respondents said they are unsure about receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, as well as there was another study in here, which also a survey which also talked about people's reluctance in getting the vaccine. So, reality is with the vaccine, and we know it's been a slow rollout here in the US, and
Hmm.
trying to get to that herd immunity level, which is anywhere between 70 to 80% to be at herd. Once we're at herd, then we can all take the masks off and start living our normal lives. But until
Hmm.
we get to that herd, we're still wearing masks, we're still socially distancing, we're still
Right.
restrictions. So the question to you is, if we never get to that herd immunity, which, and then the other caveat is, this is a vaccine that we'll probably have to do every year. They don't know, it
Right.
could be once a year, it could be every 5 years, but I think it's gonna be at least once a year. So with retail, they're in a tough spot because not
Hmm.
only are they dealing with the movement to online, now you're dealing with COVID, and now you're hoping that a majority of that 70, 80% of Americans get to vaccine. And if they don't, their retail's world's never really going to change. So what do you
Hmm.
think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's, no end date to this thing, right? So there's no clear, indication of when this thing's going to finally end. So really, we cannot expect retail to rebound to pre-pandemic level anytime soon. So the retailers really have to buckle up for the long term. But, things like these can also be sort of considered as disruptors in industries, and sort of really bring sort of some underlying currents and trends that had been going on before and make them bigger. So I think for retailers, just recognizing these new shifts, convenience, online stuff. Other things that have actually surprisingly come up with this pandemic is that more and more consumers want to shop locally. They want to make healthy choices. They want to make more responsible choices. So these underlying shifts in consumer trends had been happening for a while, and now they've just kind of blown out of proportion. So with no end date in sight, I think that's what the retailers have to focus on. Where is consumer behavior going in the future? And really sort of put their bets on that, and to make sure that they're digitally savvy. They can sort of provide seamless service. They can use their physical footprint in a way that aligns with where the consumer trends are shifting. So I think, and to some extent, since we started, talking about how this is sort of a retail recession almost, and also so taking lessons from the previous recession in 2008, what worked at the time, and I think that's really the key here, looking at the consumer trends and sort of expecting them to be permanent shifts and sort of realigning your business. For example, supply chains. We know that there were a lot of supply chain disruptions with the essential like grocery and all of that, but other industries like clothing, and they have not experienced that. But that doesn't mean that you kind of, turn a blind eye towards that. That is something that retail has to recognize the transparency in their supply chain to sort of ensure that these kind of disruptions don't happen. And, like you and I were talking about earlier with the snowfall, there's more and more natural disasters happening every year, right? So sadly, I mean, we live in a world that's kind of turbulent in some forms. And so understanding that and, making sure your supply chains can withstand those kind of things. So all of these shifts are critical to be successful.
Yeah, your comment regarding consumer trends, and now this has brought it to the forefront. I mean, we obviously we're in the higher education, the Feliciano School of Business, as most colleges and universities went fully remote last spring and this fall, mostly remote. So then it affected higher education, and I know we
Right.
talk about our children being remote as kindergartners in first, second grade. And that, it'll be interesting, and this is not a topic of this conversation, but how does education, higher education, adjust in the post-COVID world, especially in universities, where
Right.
students now are doing their classes online. Some are happy
Hmm.
about it, some aren't. But the ones that say, "Hey, I could now, I don't have to drive to a campus or park my car and burn gasoline and have to deal with tolls and deal with,
Hmm.
I have more time for myself. I want to do my classes online." So
Right.
you have those students will say, "I'm not going back to 2019.
Absolutely. Hmm.
They want to adjust." And I think higher ed will adjust as well. And they're going to start offering more online classes, more remote
Hmm.
classes. And you'll still have the in-person classes, but I think over time, that whole model is going to change even more as,
Yeah.
as a young generation, our children start getting to that point of going into college because of they're a different consumer. And ultimately the consumer controls your brand. They decide
Absolutely.
how you interact with them and how you sell to them and what products you offer. So it's going to be interesting.
And I think one of the interesting things that pandemic had brought, even though there were sort of these underlying currents in, shifts in consumer behavior before the pandemic, is that pandemic has really forced us to try new things that we wouldn't have before, like, categories like telemedicine, for example, virtual payments, and like you're saying, online learning. And apparently online learning is very common, sort of very popular in pandemic, not just amongst the traditional students, but people who were staying home and finding they had a lot of time on their hands are taking online classes to pick up a new skill or sort of add certain badges to themselves. So I think that's what's really interesting that sort of really came about due to pandemic, this sort of openness to try new things in our this brave new world that we live in now.
The other thing I think we're going to see over the summer, especially here in the US, when the vaccines will be more available. And if you want a vaccine, you'll be able to get one. I think from what they're saying by late spring, early summer, that for those who are vaccinated, who want to be able to go into a retail store without these restrictions or go to a concert or go to a sporting event, and then you have those who aren't vaccinated, who refuse
Hmm.
to be vaccinated, you can't refuse them from being admitted to these stores,
Right.
locations.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how retail handles that. And I'm not
Right.
dictated by the
It's,
government.
I guess it's like the mask thing, right? But it's so much easier to know who is and not wearing a mask and not wearing a mask. But um, vaccine, I find it hard for retailers to try to find that out and be accountable for that, because there's privacy issues with that, right? So there's all that HIPAA stuff, and so it would be a person's choice whether they're vaccinated or not, and if they want to reveal that information or not. So it might be a risk that we would be living with, and maybe the ones who are taking the vaccine feel slightly less at risk because of the vaccine.
Yeah,
So
it's funny. My wife is in human resources, and she was saying that she's read articles about job applicants applying for jobs and indicating they've been vaccinated.
Right. So yeah, there it makes total sense because, we like in job applications, we do include personal information that we wouldn't otherwise in sort of a retail environment. Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because I read an article about let's say sporting events, a baseball,
Hmm.
can they restrict it? Because right now you can't go to any baseball, basketball, football, whatever. You can't, there's no in-person attendance. But by summer, could a baseball team say, okay, well, we'll only allow the fans into the stadium that have been vaccinated. Those who are not
Hmm.
vaccinated, you're not allowed in. And there's so many legal issues with that. And you can't
Yeah.
do that. You can't restrict
No, I mean,
vaccinated.
there's with the masks themselves, right? There was issues with people not wanting to wear that. I think vaccines, well, look at New York, right? So the shots, people getting chicken pox and all that. There are communities that don't want to get vaccinated, and the school system struggles with that when there are outbreaks with measles and all of that. And but it's hard to force people to, get vaccinated.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that, I guess,
Yep. We'll see how it plays out.
so you touched upon this a few minutes ago, but do you think retail will ever let's say perfect scenario? Let's say in the U.S. we get to 80% or 75% vaccination levels. We're at herd immunity. Do you think retail will go back to the pre-pandemic where we just park our car, walk into a store, grab the shopping cart, walk around the aisles at will, no arrows, no worry about washing your hands or sterilizing your hands?
Mm.
Will we get to that point? What do you think?
Well, not in the same way as before pandemic, because, like we were talking before, yes, some of the changes are definitely pandemic related, but some of them have just been, long-term coming. So you might, like you mentioned, right? You might not go to the grocery store even after pandemic if you can get it delivered at home. However, from a, health perspective, yes, when they feel safe, people would come back to the stores because, well, and when you think about stores, let's say, think about downtown areas as well and small businesses, those are not just places where you buy stuff. It is sort of part of a community, sort of part of a lifestyle, right? So there's more, there's other forms of gratification that we get from visiting these places than just purchasing products. So I think consumers will go back for that, for sure, if there is certain need that is being gratified by them, and then for sure. But if there isn't any need that that mall or that big box store is satisfying, or the department, why would they go back even if it is safe? Like I was saying earlier, so uh, I saw this sort of estimate from JLL, which is a commercial real estate service company. They said that according to them, malls will be pre-pandemic level vacancy in 2024. So they're putting that date on when malls will again, have same amount of tenants. But I don't think the same tenants, though different type of tenants, but they might be, new vacancies. Like pop-up shops have become very popular, um, not only in, in categories such as apparel, but other categories as well, like food. And we might be seeing, Smoresburg type of stuff happen in malls. So it'll be very interesting to watch how the landscape shifts to really gratify consumers for what they want when in this sort of new retail world and our needs that have shifted permanently.
Yeah, the one area that again we could probably have a whole conversation on is how this has affected those who can't afford to shop online because they don't have access to broadband or they don't have Wi-Fi in the house or they don't even have a computer.
Right, right,
As we, we're fortunate because we have that ability to have Wi-Fi and different things. We can buy stuff online, but that's a sad situation because, and even more so with remote learning for those elementary school kids, high school kids who don't have at home broadband,
right,
Wi-Fi. But then you think about it from a shopping perspective. Those who need to go out shopping because they can't order online or can't afford to order online, they can
right,
pay the extra 10,
right.
12 bucks, whatever it is to order.
Absolutely, which we have seen. There are, based on the sales that have been happening, convenience stores and discounters have done really well, which was also the case in 2000 and 2009 recession. These categories, like your Dollar Generals, and they kind of really did well during that time and continued to do well even post recession, and we are seeing sort of same type of trend here. um, the dollar stores, the discounters, the convenience stores are still pretty strong even in their physical footprints, not just online.
Yeah, no, it's a topic we can keep talking about, and we will. I think we'll talk about this over the summer because I think at that point vaccination levels will be higher, and I think retail then will be adjusting to the new normal
Hmm.
and see how retail adjusts to it. I just think it's a fascinating topic because it's changing by the day with respect
Hmm.
to everything related to COVID, but how we all shop because we all shop. I mean, you have to buy food and you have to buy clothes and you have to do different things, and we're all being impacted by it. And really, we're at the mercy of this awful pandemic that we're dealing with,
Hmm.
as well as plus obviously it's global, so other countries are dealing with it as well. So I think probably the first time in my lifetime where I think the entire world is dealing with one issue at the same time.
Right, right, right.
Been that. So all right, well, you are always a source of great information, Manveer, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and I appreciate you shedding some light on what we're going through. Any other thoughts or comments before we wrap up?
Well, just stay safe and continue to enjoy your life in safe ways, right? It'll end at some point. So,
Right.
yeah.
All right, so thank you all for listening. I encourage all of you to go to the Business Edge podcast channel and take a look at our other podcast episodes where we have a lot of our other faculty members talking about different topics. So until then, everyone, please stay safe, and we'll talk soon.